Thank you. Thank you guys all for showing up this evening, and hopefully you guys will learn a little bit more, not just about Hungarian or Hungarian research, but you're also going to learn more about like what we do as people. I kind of like couch all my research in these public talks into something that you can like take away at the end of the night and be like, I wonder how I do this in my life. So, like Jack was saying, I am by training a prehistoric archaeologist, but I tend to do a lot of different projects all over the world. Hungary, I've worked in Greece, I still work in Greece every summer. I've worked in Vietnam and the Philippines, I've worked in Sicily. I've done a lot of different things. And just because I'm trained and I do a lot of prehistoric archaeology doesn't mean that's the only thing I do. I think it's good that as archaeologists, we're very versatile in the roles that we can take on, because when one project ends, it begins, as it so goes. A lot of these projects overlap in time. So I'm very happy to talk about all of the research that I've been doing in Hungary in particular, and the new research that I've been doing in Georgia as well. And I'd be remiss if I also didn't mention that a lot of my research is in conjunction with my husband, Attila Juha, who is also an archaeologist. He is a professor of archaeology at the University of Georgia. And it just so happens that he's also my Hungarian connection. He is not just a Hungarian archaeologist, he is Hungarian. So he told me that I should say that. So there we go. Ha, ha, ha. I did it. Paid my dues there. All right, so it seems far-fetched, right, to talk about research in Hungary and also talk about research in Georgia, but I promise you that they are connected in some way, shape, or form. We live in a very connected, highly connected world today, and these connections are based on interactions that we have with people. We have interactions that are economic, they're through trade and commerce. We have interactions that occur through travel, which we all are happy to do now, right? We also have interactions that deal with politics, but don't worry, we're not talking about that tonight too fresh, right? We're good, we're moving on. We also have interactions as they deal with technology. Technology in the sense of us using technology, its spread and development, and also how it continues to advance and change our lives and the ways we interact with one another, both online as well as in person. But interactions, they also exist on a more personal level and are the basis for every relationship that we have, whether it be collegial or familial or friendships or partnerships. These are some of the basic ways that we interact with people on a regular basis, on an everyday basis, right? So scalar-wise, whether you're looking at how the world is connected or how you relate to those around you, the driving force in all of these things is going to be interactions. But why are these interactions so important? The main reason is that through interactions, we're able to show people how we see ourselves and also how we want others to see us, right? It's all about our identity. Whenever we interact with people, we're constantly shaping our identity, how we want others to see us. So when we interact, we engage in various levels of what anthropologists call signaling. Sounds fancy. But this can include a lot of different things. It includes how we talk. Think of things like jargon or accents for that matter. But it can also be the way that we communicate with attitudes or even gestures. And one of my favorite gestures was studied by an anthropologist named Clifford Geertz. And he goes into a study about the complexity of a wink. A wink doesn't seem like much, right? It's a simple gesture. But if you unpackage the wink, there's a lot embedded there. So a wink can be a number of different things, right? There's a lot of types of winks. There's like seductive wink, there's that mischievous wink, there's that wink that means that you're in cahoots with people. All of these types of winks, they tell you a lot of information. One, you know that it's a deliberate act. It's done intentionally. Two, you know that that is being conveyed to another person, right? This is a specific gesture that's being directed to someone. But then 3, you're trying to get across a very particular message, whatever that type of wink is. So that leads us to that 4th category or importance about unpackaging this wink, is that a wink is part of an established social code that's understood between both that winker person and the winky, the person receiving the wink. So there has to be a lot of different information that's unpackaged with these simple gestures that we have. So why does signaling matter to us as anthropological archaeologists? I think that the biggest way that we signal is actually through the things that we have. These can be a number of different things, like if you have a wedding band, you're oftentimes conveying the fact that you are not available, you are taken. If you have a specific team hat on, right? Atlanta Braves, you're showing that you belong to this group and that you want to root on this team. Or you can have like traditional Hungarian garb on, and you're saying, this is my culture, this is part of my identity. All these things, you're signaling to people using material items. You can look at anything that you're wearing right now and be like, see, I'm trying to convey something here. And that's good. We do this as people all the time, and it's fascinating. And now you guys can go forth and carry out your own anthropological studies on everybody that you interact with, right? And be like, see, I understand what you're trying to tell me about who you are as a person. But just like we signal today with all these things that we have, people in the past also signal. They use their material culture to tell us about who they are, how they perceive themselves, and how they perceive themselves in relation to other people. So they're telling us all about their identity, but it's up to us as archaeologists to better interpret what this information is trying to relay. So we can look at things like ceramics, we can look at brownstone tools, we can look at houses and the structures and the way that they build or create these different types of buildings. All this stuff is going to inform us about identity. And that, in and of itself, brings me to that connection between Hungarians in the past and this work that I'm doing in Georgia. Because in both of these examples today, we're going to be focusing on how identity is a driver, how identity is something that is so important to people in the past, but also equally important to people today. So without further ado, we're going to go first to our case study in Hungary. And we're going to dive way back into the past. We're dealing with the late Neolithic. And I know this is a long time ago. So the Neolithic as a whole, 10,000 to 45,000 BCE. So journey back with me to 12,000 years ago. During the Neolithic, we see that the earliest part of the Neolithic occurs in the Near East, and then people start moving, start interacting with others around them. They start interacting with other people that were in these regions before the Neolithic revolution occurred. But as we know, people from the Near East, they decided, oops, wrong way. They decided to push forth with their new forms of subsistence with domesticated plants and domesticated animals, and their new forms of settlement with them living in permanent houses for the first time in permanent villages. And they moved from the Near East with all of this package, the Neolithic package, and they head over into the rest of Europe. Now, along the way, they also start to develop new ways of building these settlements. And one of those ways is through the creation of tells. And my research specifically focuses on tells. So we're going to have a slide that tells you what a tell is. Important stuff here. If you're not familiar with what a tell is, essentially what it is it's a man-made hill. It occurs after hundreds to thousands of years of people building a house, burning a house, building right on top, burning that. And so you can see how this slow depositional process creates this man-made hill over time. Tells are really unique because they're associated with the Neolithic. And you can see here the distribution of tells throughout the world. See, the whole world is not represented here. It's very important because it's part of this Neolithic package. Now, if we look a little closer here, here are the tells throughout southeastern Europe. And you can go all the way up here. Oh, right, don't have, this is why you told me to have a pointer. Up here, this is actually Hungary. And so it is the northern and westernmost extent of tells. And this is really important for us because it is very interesting to see why and how these things stop. Now, I also like to give you an illustration of what these tells look like. Some tells can look like Tel Bari in Syria. You're talking about over 112 feet high. That's pretty significant. Have you ever heard of Tel Aviv, for instance? Another tell that has a modern day city located on top of it. But in Hungary, tells are a little different. This is a tell in Hungary. Tells in Hungary are much shorter, smaller. If you're having difficulty seeing that tell, don't worry. Mark it right here. It's about 4 meters, so 12 feet in height. So you can see quite different in terms of the size and also in terms of how long it was inhabited. So big difference there. Neolithic tells began to be settled in Hungary in particular around 5500 BCE and continued to be inhabited during the Neolithic until 4500 BCE. So for us, we call that from the middle Neolithic to the late Neolithic. And this is where my research focuses in Hungary. If I give you this map, you can situate yourself. Here is Italy, Croatia, here's Hungary. And then my research area is over here in southeastern Hungary, here on the Great Hungarian Plain. And you can see that it's encompassed by the Ercsics River up north, the Maros River in the south, and on the western side, we have the Tisza River, with the primary area with the Kiddish River system. Now, in this region, we actually have a number of different regional archaeological projects that have been ongoing since the late 90s, which is fantastic because we kind of like worked together and created the Kiddish Consortium since we all work in the same region. And this is to our benefit because not only do we get to collaborate on different projects, but we also get to rely on one another's supplies, resources, personnel, and specialties in order to promote expanding our research and expanding our knowledge about these first farmers in this part of the world. And you can see my project right here is couched between the youngest project and some of these older projects. So I direct the Prehistoric Interactions on the Plain project, and it's been my baby since 2013, and it's developed quite significantly. And you'll learn more about what we've done today. So during the late Neolithic, so 5000 to 4500 BCE, there happens to be 3 different archaeological cultures on the Great Hungarian Plain. We have the Chisinau up north. Care about them? We're not even going to talk about them tonight, besides that one line. Then we also have the Herkai culture, and to the south, we have the Tisza culture. Extensive research has been done on the Tisza culture. My husband studies the Tisza culture, his best friend studies the Tisza culture, everyone studies the Tisza culture, but not a lot of attention has been given to the Herkai culture. There's been some work. There's been one really good intensive excavation of a tell site, a Herkai tell site, that has revealed a lot of information about the Herkai people. And so based on a lot of Tisza research, a little bit of Herkai research, there are some differences that we've noted between these different archaeological cultures. In terms of site placement, we know that Herkai sites are almost always found on oxbows of paleomeanders, ancient riverways. So you can see this is the oxbow of the ancient river, and this is where the site would have been. This is different from Tisza sites, which happen to be on flat settlements that are located near rivers, but are not restricted by them. Because this leads to other aspects of these cultures. So in terms of architectural style, because these Herkai sites are located on these oxbows, they're restricted in terms of their growth. And so they tend to have 2-story houses instead of expanding horizontally. So 2-story houses are important for Herkai sites. Whereas Tisa longhouses, they tend to be one story, and the sites can be quite expansive. And then in terms of subsistence strategy, we know that Herkai sites and Herkai people tend to have more wild fauna, relying on things like wild cattle or ox in higher proportions than compared to the Tisa, who rely on more domesticated faunal remains. So things like the sheep and goat and pigs in particular. And then finally, when it comes to burial practices, we know that the Herkai tend to bury their dead sometimes on the tell, specifically if it's infant burials, they can be found on the tell. But we don't have a ton of information. So these are general conclusions. Whereas Tisa burials are almost never on the tell, they're in association with the houses themselves. So people have them close to the houses instead of on these tells, which are more like ritualistic centers of the sites. But let me stress that this information is based on that limited information about the Herkai as a whole. So there needs to be a lot more work. Don't worry, that's more work. The biggest difference between Herkai and Tisa, though, are the ceramics, and ceramic style is what we say in archaeology. With ceramic style, we're talking about how they decorated the ceramics. So with the Tisa, they tend to incise their ceramics, whereas the Herkai, they rely on painting as opposed to solely just incisions. So all this together, this was part of phase 1 of PIPP, on Prehistoric Interactions on the Plain project. What I wanted to do was to try to reconstruct interactions in the past between different late Neolithic sites to see if we can model cultural boundaries that are informative about identity. And so to do that, I had to rely on a lot of different forms of analyses, including that stylistic analysis of the ceramics and the compositional analysis of the ceramics. If you're not familiar with compositional analysis, I'm not going to bore you too much about that tonight. What's important about that is you're able to look to see what an item is made up of, how much magnesium, how much sodium, how much potassium, et cetera, et cetera. And knowing that, you generate sort of like a fingerprint for any given item. When you have a fingerprint, do like CSI stuff, and you try to match that fingerprint to a geological source. In doing so, you play a fancy game of connect the dots and see where an item originated and compare it to where it ended up in the archaeological record. Pretty straightforward with that. And so both the stylistic analysis and the compositional analysis allowed me to reconstruct short distance interactions because Great Hungarian Plain, it's an alluvial area, really good clay. You can go to your back door or your backyard and get some clay and make a pot. So there's ceramics generally don't travel very far. But lithics is a different game. Remember, we're on a Great Hungarian Plain. There's no rock. It's mud, just mud. So to get any of these lithic materials, so chips, stone tools, things that you need to cut down crops or to hunt animals with, you need to go to sources that are far away. You're talking about hundreds of kilometers away. And so because of that, I can reconstruct long distance interactions and look at the type of lithics, also look at the technological information. So is it a flake? Is it a blade? Is it a point? Is it a core? Different stuff like that. And then combine that compositional analysis too, so I can pinpoint where this material is actually originating from. All that together, long distance interactions. Having multiple forms of interactions allows you then to better reconstruct these boundaries at play. And that's exactly what I was able to do. So I had many different sites. I had 4 different Herkai sites located up here. And I had 12 different Tisa sites located to the south. And all this research together, I was able to illustrate that near the boundary, we have a strong expression of style where you'd have a lot of painted shirts and a lot of inside shirts. So people are actively enforcing their boundaries by utilizing a particular style to decorate their ceramics. But the further away you get from this boundary area, the less important it is. You find about equal proportion of painted and inside shirts, which is fascinating in and of itself, because also the compositional analysis informed us that shirts are traded. even though we thought they weren't going to be moving very far, they can be. And so we know that boundaries are actively enforced, even though we also have movement across the boundaries. So this was a really inspiring project, and it helped to motivate me and encourage me to continue pursuing these interests and to further investigate identity at a different scale. So I was able to regionally investigate identity and clearly define these cultural boundaries. Great, but how does local scale, how does local scale interaction feed into these regional boundaries? To address that question, I had to choose a site. And because I wanted to do more research on hair pie sites, 4 sites to choose from that I already worked on previously. So I looked at the site of Georgia-Gainesville. It's like, that'd be great. Unfortunately, there is a modern-day cemetery on top of that tell site. So probably not going to want to work there. Can't do many excavations. Yeah, just stay clear, right? So then I was like, okay, I can work at the site of Seklumbake. It is really close to other sites that I've worked at. But okay, there is a family camp located on that tell site. So also probably not going to be able to work on that site. So that left Chipnikwapostashdom. And luckily for me, this site happens to be in an agricultural field, right, for the archaeological researcher. So that is where I decided to focus on. Throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll just call it Chipman. It's easier. But in case you're wondering, it means Chipman's little cabbage hill. It's very cute. So this site has been my focus since 2016, where we've done intensive research at this site. We've done photometry and survey. And so for the remainder of the time that I'm going to talk about this Neolithic research, I'm going to focus on the results that we've obtained from these different field seasons that we've had since 2016. All right. So one of the methods that archaeologists like to use is this method called magnetometry. It's really awesome because what you can identify are subsurface features. Features like burials, houses, wells, pits, a lot of different things. So you never have to like just put a shovel in the ground before you start working. You can do this and get a whole map of the entire settlement. And then it can help you target certain areas that you want to excavate. So it no longer has to be like the needle in the haystack. You know exactly where each piece of straw is in that haystack and you can go straight for it. So with this in mind, what I wanted to do was utilize multiple different techniques because in addition to the agricultural fields, we actually have, a little bit of this wooded area. So we've used a magnetometer that's a single magnetometer, but then this one, which they let me drive once, is an ATV that has multiple sensors hooked up to it, and they're multiple magnetometer sensors. It has 16. So it can knock out a huge area in like no time at all. And that makes it really ideal to utilize. And like I said, only once was I allowed to drive because you do have to be somewhat meticulous. And I didn't know how to drive ATV. It's a learning process. The important thing about this is that it gave us this amazing set of data. I'm going to interpret this stuff for you because I know it just looks like gray blob, but I promise it's more than that. So if we look at a close-up of this area right here, do you guys see all of these rectangles right here? You can see that they're all over the place. Rectangle, rectangle. All of those are houses. There's also this faint circle that you can see right here. It's a ditch, and this is the tell. So there's a ditch that goes around the tell itself. And then outside the tell, there's still houses, tons and tons and tons of houses that continue into this wooded area right here. Another area of interest is located right here. Now, it might not look like much. There's a faint circle that goes right here. There's no houses in this area. The importance of it is that all of this gray that has no material in it, this is an ancient paleo meander, an ancient river that no longer exists today. It's all agricultural fields. But in antiquity, in the prehistoric times, people intentionally cut the paleomeander right here to create an island. So this is an island at the middle of the site. Why? I don't know, but there's no houses on it. And so it's really awesome. And so we've named it Suspicion Island because why? It's suspicious. This was also really interesting. At this site, we have a second area that's fortified. Unheard of. This is really weird for the late Neolithic. It's weird for Harappai, it's weird for Tiza, it's weird for everyone to have two areas with enclosures. And this one, you can see the ditches right here. And there are houses. They're harder to see, but they're faint and they're there. All this is really strange. But if you look further, you can see the settlement continues this way, but we have clipped the edge, we're done now. And the settlement extends to the south and west of the tell, going all the way over here as well. It's a very large site, 130 hectares in size. It's massive. It's the biggest late Neolithic settlement known to date. With archaeology, the end. Now, working with my colleagues, we've also started to interpret this magnetometry data. Remember, our whole thing is looking at interactions and how this informs about identity. And what we've noted is that there's different clusters of houses. Again, they're not really houses. We've ground truth that. It doesn't look like they're houses. But we do have these other neighborhoods that we are really interested in. We have this neighborhood that we're calling like the Tell and East of Tell neighborhood. We have this area north of Tell. We have, I've named it the Double Ditch Playground. I'll see. We have this area that my colleague is calling the Middle Zone. And then we have the Southwest area. We're going to continue doing work on these locations, but this could either be the result of the settlement developing and growing over time, or people are making neighborhoods, or a mixture of both. Think about any town. Think of your own town. There's oftentimes different little neighborhoods, and people in those neighborhoods have different potential identities or projects or group community efforts. I think of my own neighborhood. I live in Athens, Georgia, but I live in Forest Heights in a neighborhood there. And we have the Blueberry Festival every year. And so there's certain activities that unite you with your micro community within the broader community. And so it'll be interesting to see if we identify those processes at this site. Now, in addition to looking at this possible aspect of identity, we're also looking at burning processes. So here's the thing with magnetometry. The reason that these houses are picked up so nicely with magnetometry is because they're burnt oftentimes. And when you burn something, it changes the magnetic field of the item. With the housing structures in the late Neolithic, we're talking about burnt daub, so clay. Clay that is heavily burnt in some areas, not burnt in other areas. And you can identify heavily burnt stuff based on the magnetometric signature. We don't need to talk about that further, but you're going to have to believe me when I say there's heavily burned stuff on the tell, and that's identified with the red. But then the further away you get from the tell, the less important it seems to be to burn your house. So we have areas that are partially burnt, the yellow ones. And then we have areas that are not burnt, so houses that are not burnt. Again, the further away you get, the less important it is that you burn your tell or burn your house down. And so again, it makes this question like, what are these social practices that are occurring that are helping people create the sense of identity and also, on a broader scale, can create the sense of community? We're going to explore it further, so don't worry. In my research, not to, you only get a snippet. Now, in addition to the magnetometry, we also have carried out surface collection. It's important to combine surface collection, so just walking these agricultural fields and picking up materials from the surface. Because if you combine the magnetometry with the surface collection, again, you get a better understanding of the distribution of materials as it relates to certain subsurface features like houses. So one of the big things that we've been looking at, daub distribution. For areas that have higher concentration, it's going to be darker. Areas with lower concentration of daub, it's going to be lower. Remember, daub is that building material. So you can see on the surface, we have a lot of daub throughout the settlement, but a big concentration on Tell here, just east of the Tell, and a little bit to the south and north of Tell. What's really cool about the daub is that sometimes you can see the impressions of the sticks that they're using to create these buildings, but also you can see impressions of the wood floors too. So they're preserved in the burnt daub. That's stuff. So we can also, there's potential to see what kind of wood is being used on these houses. We've also collected all of these ceramics on the surface for the site. Oh, I should have mentioned this too. Both of these areas, they haven't been surface collected yet because of sunflowers. Detriment to us sometimes. So they would just had grown, they had crops on them. So we'll get to them in another season. For the surface collection, we found KFI shirts, so these painted wood. We've also found Tiza shirts, and then we find some that are just differently decorated as well. Here is the kicker. Remember our suspicion island? Here's the Tell right here. Yeah, it has a fair number. Here's Suspicion Island. There's so many shirts on Suspicion Island, making it more suspicious, right? And so more investigations need to occur on that at that location. We also have done surface collection, including groundstone tools, as well as well, any type of groundstone tool. And you can see that the distribution of groundstone tools is very interesting. We're still talking about areas that have houses. So all of, well, not that one. This one has houses. This one has houses. This is our Suspicion Island again. But when we look at these materials, we're also trying to see like, maybe this neighborhood down here, people are actually like specializing in creating these stone tools, or maybe they're the ones that are in charge of grinding all the grain in order to make flour for the community. Maybe there's a division of labor that's being represented at the site. Again, to be determined. I feel like I'm getting your guys' hopes up with these questions. We also collected lithics or chipstone tools. You'll note that there are various types. We have Vulcanian flint, we have obsidian, lots of different stuff. Tons of material again on Suspicion Island. And then over here to the north and slightly to the west of the Tell, which is located right here, you also have a lot of lithics, suggesting maybe, again, division of labor at the site. So to further our investigations in 2022, just this past summer, we decided to open some test excavation units. These are only 1 by 1 meter test excavation units, with the purpose being to ground truth our magnetometry, see if like we actually are hitting houses like we think we are, and also to collect materials to radiocarbon date. So we can actually identify if the site happened all at once or if it gradually developed over time. So that's what we did. We opened up 12 different units. Here is just an image where you can see this is the Tell, very high. Here's Suspicion Island. We did open a unit there. Here's that double ditch playground. So you can see that these are higher elevation areas, but you can see where all these test units are located. We're trying to get a nice spread across the site. You might be wondering, how do you go about digging a 1 by 1? What you do is you first lay out a 1 by 1. You start to remove the plow zone, then you dig deeper. This unit happened to go down over, it was almost 2 meters down. So quite significant bit of dirt to go through. But we did get materials from every single excavation unit. And so with that in mind, we are waiting, fingers crossed, for our dates. We should be getting those dates anytime now. We're running those C14 samples now. In the coming season, next year, we're going to finish the track survey and we're going to expand our excavations to include entire houses. Again, with the goal being to see how people at the site interacted with one another and whether or not we do have these micro communities at the site. And we want to see if identity really can be teased out within these prehistoric texts. Now you might be thinking then, how does this relate to Tallapoosa, Georgia? And it's a great question. I think the best way to connect this is with that idea of identity. So with this in mind, there are a lot of Hungarians actually living in Georgia today. There are Hungarian Americans, and they happen to be a very close-knit community. As I told you at the beginning of the talk, my husband's Hungarian. We have moved 3 different times in the States, and every time he finds Hungarians. It's amazing to me, this sense of community that exists with modern-day Hungarians. Something that tends to link us back to the far late Neolithic past and our sense of identity there. So because we got together with this group of Hungarians for serious Hungarian sausage making, it's very important, you guys. They knew that we were archaeologists, and we had a great connection with these people. And they happened to know about this town, Budapest, Georgia. Maybe you've never heard of it before. I hadn't heard of it before. But in the 1880s, what happened? There we go. In the 1880s, Hungarians were actively recruited to move down to Georgia and to establish this town that is known as Budapest, Georgia. In case you're wondering where that's located, it's right here. Here's a historic map of Haralson County, Georgia. And here's Tallapoosa, located right here. Just on down the road is Budapest, followed by Waco.
Huh.
Why were Hungarians actively recruited? That might be your next logical question. It's because there was a desire to make this area a really big wine county. And Hungarians, famously known for making excellent wine. And so these families were living actually in Pennsylvania at the time when they were recruited to come on down. About 200 families were solicited to come on down to Georgia. Of those, more than 50 families accepted the offer, moved on down in the 1880s, established not only Budapest, Georgia, they established 2 other towns nearby. I do have some historic photos. These are some of the vineyards that were associated with Budapest, Georgia. Some of the local individuals who were running the grapes in the vineyards. And then this was the church. They actually established a Catholic church in Budapest, Georgia as well. I include this picture because none of this exists today. There's almost no remnant of Budapest, Georgia. Instead, there's very few signs that a vineyard was even there. This is actually a wine cellar that's located on somebody's property that's almost entirely filled up now with various debris and overgrowth. The other thing that remains is the Budapest Cemetery. So again, here's Tallapoosa. Here's the Budapest Cemetery located right here. If that doesn't help you identify where we are, no worries. I zoomed out a little bit. So we're up here in Dahlonega. Here's Budapest Cemetery. It's really close to the state that shall not be mentioned. It's really close to Alabama State. Now, the cemetery itself has fallen into a really rough state currently. And so the local Hungarian American community wanted to do something about this. And so they have started this initiative to revamp the cemetery, put it back to its proper place. But when they started clearing out different areas like the overgrowth and such, they noted that some of the markers for the interred were gone, or they were just stolen at some point, to be honest. And so our friends came to us and they asked us if we would be willing to try to help locate some of these burials. Sure, of course, we'd be happy to help you. This is something that archaeologists do. We can do this. This is in our toolkit. And so we got a ground penetrating radar, which does something similar to magnetometry in the sense that it can help to identify subsurface features, such as burials. And I think I have a video here. You can see him operating. This is Noah. Noah's operating the ground penetrating radar. It has a GPS, so we always know where we are in the world. And then this is the part of the system that emits a signal, and then when it hits, it doesn't matter. So that little fancy device just rolls right over everything and collects all the data. That's the important part. Now, with the results of the ground penetrating radar, not only are we able to identify those burials that still have the different markers in association with them, we are also able to identify burials that did not have any known marker in association with them. So we went through just last week, so this is hot off the press, you guys. We went through and using an RTK GPS and also old-fashioned just measuring it in, we were able to locate the different areas where there are possible interred individuals. With that in mind, the Hungarian American community is working right now and throughout this week to place new markers on these areas, on these locations. So how we left it on Saturday, yeah, we were out there Saturday, we were able to mark all the different locations for the interred that need headstones. And the community is out there doing that now. So hopefully I'll have some more pictures to show you in the future. To tie it all back to this idea of identity, these individuals were buried between 1885 to 1962. The cemetery is no longer actively in use. The Hungarian community actually more or less dissolved in after 1907, because in 1907, the Prohibition Act passed in Georgia, making wine not really profitable anymore. So a lot of people, a lot of Hungarians, they moved back to Pennsylvania, but some stayed and continue to use this area, continue to use the cemetery up into the 60s, where the last individual was interred. And now today, the Hungarian American community is still identifying as this being part of their culture, part of their heritage, part of something that they want to invest in because it's part of their identity. And that's really special, I think. So with that, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I saved 10 minutes, 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. But thank you guys so much for your attention and for letting me present on this. It was the first time I was able to talk about our research in Tallapoosa, Georgia, and hopefully it's not the last time, because we're going to continue doing this research because I think it's really important to have this connection and to continue to invest in it. So we already have spring break plans to go out to Tallapoosa and work in the archives and do some interviews as well. So stay tuned. Maybe next spring I can give you an update on where we're at with that. One more slide, I'm sorry. One more slide, you guys. Also, if any of this was of interest to you, we just finished putting together our call for applications. Attila Juha and I are going to be going on 3 different field seasons in late spring and also throughout the summer in Hungary. And we're going to be allowing students or inviting students to join us. So there is an application process. You can click on the QRL code if you are interested. And yeah, that is where I'll end it today. Thank you all. Questions?
How big is the Hungarian community there now?
In Tallapoosa?
In the Tallapoosa area.
They're not in Tallapoosa. So there are some local descendants still. I haven't done the interviews with them yet, so whether or not they identify as Hungarian or if they're just like ancestors here, I couldn't say. But the local Hungarian American community that we're working with, they're quite numerous. So I think there's about 50 different families that I know about. There's also a Hungarian ball per year. So I'll be going to that in February. I know, yeah.
The machine the does X-rays of the ground.
Which one?
The
last one, small one. GPR. Okay.
So you talked to how does GPS on that?
Mhm.
So whenever you find something, does it like ping it and mark it on the GPS?
It does not ping it. So it sends a signal into the ground, and then when it hits a different matrix, that signal is sent back, and so it measures differences in the soil. And so it sends you like this weird printout. I can show you an image of it. I don't have one in this PowerPoint, but it kind of looks like fuzzy gray lines. But then like changing that fuzzy gray line is like, well, that's something right there. So you have to have a keen eye, a skilled eye at knowing how to identify these things.
I didn't know if you could just like mark it, like push a button and unmark it, say, it's on something new.
The post-processing of the data is when you can identify when these, where and when these things occur. Sometimes people will say like, oh, yeah, I can see it on my screen, there might be something here, but they won't want to confirm that until they do the post-processing of the data.
So you said that essentially it was an island, little river that was man-made.
Yes, the suspicion I mentioned that.
How do you think people would go about in the Neolithic era making it into that?
So it's on that natural curve of the river. So that part's cool. What they would do then, you have to start in the middle, dig out from the middle. And then when you get to the very end where the two rivers are, then you have to knock those down eventually. But you have to dig out that moat first. You're just moating it. And how are they digging it? With tools, with groundstone tools or antlers. Like they make bone tools as well. Yeah, it's complex. And you do have to have a sense of engineering to a certain degree, right? So that floodwaters don't hit you too soon.
Definitely significant
Effort, organization, time,
culture.
Lots of baskets.
lots of baskets. We don't have. They don't preserve. They don't preserve, unfortunately, but they're most definitely, I mean, we assumed they were baskets because we do have impressions of woven grasses, for instance, on some ceramics.
Good, good, good.
Did I see a hand over here? Over here?
Bigman Geophysical,
Hmm.
is that Dan Bigman?
It is Dan Bigman.
He just presented to this group many years ago.
He wonderfully agreed to help us with this project.
Wonderful.
So they did get a shout out on here. Sorry, I didn't shout out.
That's okay.
He actually taught here one year.
Yeah, he is a UGA grad as well, so got recommended
There you go.
to hit him up by people at UGA as well. Yeah,
Well, essentially, my mother's entire family is from Haralson County. Have been since before the Civil War.
do you know if she's Hungarian?
Are they Hungarian?
Not at all. but
Okay.
my
Awesome.
father-
To Eastern Europeans as well as Germans
Yeah,
that lived in that
that's what made there, but there were other groups.
county.
My grandmother mentioned gypsies
Also possible.
and
The Roma are all throughout Eastern Europe. So it's quite possible that some also migrated or immigrated to the
that's
States.
just the word she used.
Yeah.
How kind of gypsies, but I actually had a girl's a friend of hers who was a gypsy. But yeah, there was also there was at least a fairly large community of Creek Indians on the Tallapoosa River who were never removed, but were practicing the green corn ceremony, interpretation of quartz crystals,
Uh-huh.
which is a Creek thing. You read crystals, and the local whites would go to her to have their fortunes told.
Interesting.
And they made baskets, they tanned deer skins, and they daubed their houses on the inside and outside with mud. This was in the 1930s.
That's fascinating. I mean, I had no idea. I'm not surprised that there were indigenous people south
Oh,
of
they still live
communities,
in
but
that?
I don't.
Is it still there?
Now, physically it's gone, but there are people. One of my uncles married a woman in the Creek
Nice.
in that community. So they're not around physically that I know of. One of the families became noted gospel music singers in the 40s.
Diverse background there.
It was a very,
You have a lot of different connections, actually.
so anyway, it was pretty interesting, plus a few other.
I look forward to finding out more of these stories too, from not just people who still live there, but also by going through the archival records. And it's I'm looking forward to expanding on this story because this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much more that can be unpackaged.
Yeah, there may be one family you need to talk to, which I'll talk to you about later.
Send me the info.
Yeah, it's weird local politics, but
It's always fun.
that would bore everybody else. Couple families, you probably haven't talked.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about it later. That'd be great. Yeah.
Can I chip in here, please, from a long way away?
Wait, hold on a second, Robin.
Right.
Why do they stop? Stop. Changes, the terrain changes. So this is a lovely alluvial depositing area, right? So it's really ideal for creating tells because tells aren't just a process where the bird burn, build. You also need to have readily available resources like clays and soils in order to help build that up over time. So the thinking is that is one of the reasons. This was just an ideal area that was very similar to the rest of southeastern Europe in particular. But then once you get out of this region, everything changes geographically and geologically, excuse me, of course, geographically.
So that geographic hindrance kept them, there probably were other places, but they stopped being productive for that fragment.
Yeah, exactly. That's the current thinking. Though ask me in 20 years and maybe we'll have a different theory working.
Can you go a little bit more into the aspect, how that plays a little role?
Yeah, so the first aspect is really interesting. Some people study this and they refer to it as domicide, like the murder of the house. But there's oftentimes to be this significant ritual component, either because you're trying to ensure that all the spirits and everything else are killed with the house, or it's done intentionally for this purpose of building up the area. There's several different notions behind it, but the fact that we don't see the burning over the entirety of the site, this suggests that there has to be more social reasons behind it than just the ritualistic burning, right? Or else why wouldn't everybody want to ritualistically burn their house? There has to be something more to it. What that is, we don't entirely know, but so we're left saying that it has to have some ritual aspect to it. Again, this aspect of it being further away from the tell, that ritual center, that might feed into this narrative as well, for my side at least. We haven't done this with every.
When did that ritual die off?
I don't think it ever. I don't know. I don't think that people have investigated that because wattled up houses continue to be utilized. Even in the 1900s, people were using mud and sticks in order to build their houses because it's very efficient. It keeps the house nice and cool in the winter and the summer, and it helps to insulate in the winter. But I don't know if they were burning their houses throughout this period. That I don't think is what was done. They just normally.
Someplace else.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
We have a question online from Robin. Robin, Robin, you there?
Yes, I am.
Keep in mind that you're coming off the speakers on my laptop, so speak clearly. Go ahead.
I'll try. Bragg members may remember that I gave talks a few years back on the development of wine and how archaeology helped to trace that. Interestingly, stretching through both the Neolithic period and the Hungarian vineyards down in Tallapoosa. But my question is slightly focused in this instance. One of the things that was very significant in the development of wine as a commodity in the Neolithic period was tied up, I believe, with the development of civilization is not the right word, but social structures, the development of moving from family to chieftainship through to principalities and kingship, which gave an economic thrust. I'm wondering whether the work that you're doing in Hungary has given you any insight into the level of social organization that was taking place at that time?
Absolutely. So piggybacking off that question about the creation of the island itself, we have a lot of evidence for a highly structured, organized society that is requiring a lot of people and a lot of management of the people. And whenever we get increased number of people, whenever we get big development projects like the building of the tell or the creating of an island, cutting of the moat to create an island, whenever we have these big socially organized activities, there's going to be some sort of social hierarchy that starts to emerge. Similarly, we also have evidence for the starting of social differentiation when it comes to like burial practices, with some people being buried with a lot more goods than other people, or with very specific goods. Like we have this Neolithic burial where you have a lot of groundstone tools, and it's often been interpreted as a person who practiced this, who was a craft specialist. And that's something else that's really important, craft specialization. We start getting more highly developed types of ceramics during this time, suggesting again that people are investing more in certain practices. And if you're able to invest in the creating of certain crafts, then that doesn't allow you to pursue like agriculture or hunting or tending to the herds. So you're going to have to rely on other people to provide that. Again, all of these things are suggestive of emerging social hierarchy during the late Neolithic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, fine.
I'd say, sustenance wise or agriculturally specifically, do you know if they were likely to plant on the, what was it, 12 kilometers, I think, of that square area? Or do you think they planted outside of that?
That's a really good question. So we don't know. We assume that they're probably growing both in that area as well as maybe outside that area in order to feed everybody at the site. But the other thing that we need are those C14 dates, because are these people all living there at the same time, or are they living there at different times? So we don't want those dates mixed up.
That was gonna be my other question, is like the carbon 14 dates, are they, do you expect? What do you expect?
No, that so I expect the tell to have some of the earliest dates. Tell is going to be the earliest that we have. Then the further you get from the tell, I think you're going to have some areas that are contemporaneous that grew at the same time or developed at the same time. And then the furthest areas, those are going to be the last parts of the site that are inhabited. We see this at another late Neolithic site, a Tisa site, so but it's nice to do comparative research, right? And see how that has developed and compare it to the hair pie culture. The site that I'm talking about, that's a Tisa site, it's 10 kilometers away. And so if they're simultaneously occupied or contemporaneous with one another, that would also be like beautiful, because then we can talk more about this identity building and about how two contemporaneous sites are doing things different, but also same at the same time. So that's my guess, but again, absolutely.
I was gonna ask about the burials. Do you have a fairly large number of burials that you've exhumed?
No, we have none from my site, from Chukma, 0 variants, no variants yet. But that's okay. I don't need them yet. Later.
We need a lot more data if you could get DNA of that.
Oh, it would be interesting, because then we could like give this data to other DNA projects that have been ongoing in the region to see more information about if we have any migratory people at this time. We don't anticipate having anybody, but it will be interesting.
Okay.
We have a question online about the QR code, and let me just give you the QR code right now.
Oh, you're connected on the other side too.
Yeah, sorry. Need to see what I'm doing.
We will be circulating this. It's not like this is the only time to get the QRL code. We'll be circulating it to UNG and UGA.
that was the question.
Mhm.
So how did the students get it?
Yep. We just got final permission and approval to circulate it, so I just made it live today, like at 4 o'clock before I left Athens.
You made it live where?
It looks like you'll be able to access
Right.
yeah.
How do you calculate the population density?
Also a good question. First thing that you need to know is which houses are contemporaneous with one another. So that's the first thing. Once you know the number of houses, we also know the size of these houses. They're not small. They're 20 meters by approximately 10-meter houses. They're quite large. So they're probably multi-generational houses. Some of the estimates that have been done suggest that you can have between 5-7 people in a longhouse. So once you know the number of houses that are occupied at the same time, then you can calculate.
And can you tell from the radiography whether or not they're single or multiple story?
No, I cannot actually. That's another great question. So when you have magnetometry, when you have structures that are on top of each other, it creates this palimpsest, and you only know when you dig. And so we did dig one of the houses in that test unit, that one that went down almost 2 meters. That one was a 2-story house. It was on top of the tell, and that's what we would expect to find based on the excavations of another Harappai site, the only other Harappai site that had major excavations.
And
So
I don't want to disparage the Hungarian community. That's part of it.
well, then you can say what you want.
But what's interesting to note is the elevation of Tallapoosa
Mhm.
is about 1,100 feet. And most people who raise for wine know that the optimum minimum is about 1,700 feet. And why did they pass the line to go down there to a place that's not as productive?
I have no idea actually.
Sales job in Pennsylvania.
What's that?
Sales job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, somebody.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, it is where they went to where they were told, and they were sponsored, you know, like
Yeah.
somebody said, like, we have this land here. Now, like maybe 17,000 is optimal, but Hungarians, they're good at making wine. They can make wine apparently at 11,000 too. Because they were very successful, according to the clippings that I've read. They were very successful. Their wine was well received until 19.
Yeah, the whole farming community in that part of Georgia was not based on cotton.
No,
There was
it's
some
not.
cotton, but not much. And I can tell you from hearing the tales and seeing it practiced, but the community there of farmers, and most of them were tenant farmers by this time, were highly skilled agriculturalists. And they were good at everything.
They joined forces with the Hungarians.
Probably not, but still they were still good. What I mean is they were very good at, a variety of agricultural techniques and crops and,
Making a less productive area more productive.
right, then you wouldn't think it would be, but adapting and trying different things and real creative and strangely enough, good at what they did. So I can see why, well, let's try winemaking to go along with moonshine. But
Yeah, funny story too. The church, that Catholic church that was established, it burned down after 1960 because there was an illegal still in the basement. Whoops,
maybe it's fortunately never did.
that's a Haralson County story.
If I can chip in there, Rick, 1,700 feet is a good elevation around here for wine growing, but there's a lot of wine that is grown in southern Georgia at a much lower elevations because they're using different varietals. That rather than Vitis vinifera, they're using Vitis rotifunda and other native American grapes. And I suspect that the Hungarian vineyard approach was to use not necessarily muscadines, but other American grapes and hybrids that were successful in lower altitudes and in the more challenging environment from for vinifera.
Sometimes or another variety that
Okay.
show up in the south.
This is something I'm gonna have to investigate only through experimental archaeology, right?
Yeah, well, the Norton grape, or Cynthiana as it's known, is much more effective. It's an easy grape to grow down south, and in the Vienna exhibition in about 1870, it was Norton wines were regarded as being probably the greatest potential new varieties in the world. So the Hungarian essay into wine production in the Tallapoosa region wasn't totally stupid.
There was logic behind it. I like it. See, again, more studying that I need to do, more researching I need to do on this topic.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, Casey.
So many burials or those signs are.
Yeah, so there were 22 that were originally identified either through grave markers or pilfered grave markers, so like part of it's gone. And then we identified, we have, I think we identified 21 more, if I have the number correct. I think that there are 43 total now that we have.
You suspect there's more?
No, because it's clearly demarcated the extent of the cemetery. So unless they are doing like double interred, like one right on top of another, that would be the only way to account for additional burials. We feel pretty confident in this number.
You're comfortable with the boundaries that they have?
Yep.
Did you not check outside the boundaries?
It was associated with the Catholic Church, so this was consecrated ground. So yeah, I guess there could be burials outside, but we did not check that area. That would be something to further explore.
Well,
We also want to find where this church is.
okay.
We haven't found it.
I managed to find a church location in the forest some years ago. In an off season, it was in, I think, January or February,
Okay.
when the jonquils started coming up. There's nothing left on the surface, but this neat pattern of a walkway leading up to the front of the building, and then all the way around it were jonquils growing and blooming.
Yeah.
I had seen in the records that there was supposed to be a church in there somewhere, and I had no question about it when I saw the jonquils out there.
Right.
But it was, they're a short-lived plant, but when they come up, it's real obvious.
You should go before spring break. Maybe we'll just go on a weekend or something.
There you
and check it out in January or February.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you showing up.